Welcome, everybody, to our monthly meditation with the Marin Interfaith Council. My name is Scott Quinn. Thank you for joining us. We're so blessed to have tonight a wonderful friend of the Marin Interfaith Council, Rabbi Henry Shreibman. He has served as faculty member at Dominican University as an assistant professor of religion and philosophy, who reintroduced the study of biblical Hebrew and Latin while teaching a blend of applied ethics, ethics in healthcare, and comparative religion classes. Also a professor at CSU Sonoma State, where he developed their Jewish Studies program beginning in 2009. His academic focus has been at the juncture of comparative ancient ethics, philosophy, and wisdom literature, the synergy of the Greco-Roman period in Israel with the rise of early Christianity, and the evolution of anti-Semitism. He's been active in interfaith and multicultural visioning and worked for over 40 years in the US, England, and Israel. He earned a PhD, Master in Philosophy, and MA from Columbia University, New York in Comparative Ancient Religions and Literatures. And he's an ordained rabbi since 1981 from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in Philadelphia. In March 2013, he was listed among America's most inspiring rabbis by the Jewish Daily Forward. And he brings wisdom, humor, and passion to his work. His enthusiasm for his chosen academic pursuits, rabbinic work, and student-centered approach is contagious. And if you already know him, we know that you're going to love him tonight because we do. Thank you so much, Rabbi Shreibman, for being with us tonight, and blessings to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Am I able to share the screen now?
Yes.
I love asking permission. So let us begin. I was very pleased to join you. I was supposed to do March, got verblunget, and here we are. So starting in 1982, apparently, I ran into this cut and paste document. I hope it's large enough that you can see. This is really literally cut and paste. Apparently, I was a rabbi for 1 year. Thank you for reminding me when I started in this gig. And it seems as though I was already collecting texts about this interesting dilemma. Rabbis in my era, from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, were incredibly serious people. There were a couple of wise guys. There were mostly male rabbis in that era. But I seemed to also be at another juncture, which was back in 82, I noticed that when the rabbis, or in the Hebrew Bible, when the Bible talked about miracles, very often there was a pirate smile. There was a little something that they knew, that we knew, that you shouldn't talk about. And that sort of look that we call the pirate smile. Here's an Ethiopian Beta Israeli woman, the same sort of glance. If it were just the glance, she might be killing you. If it's just the smile, she might be drawing you near to her. So the rabbis developed, I believe, humor that pushed you away, repelled you, and then made you think, or pulled you too close to them, and that this was a methodology for teaching. And it's interesting, I think, because there is a phrase that will be my catchphrase. You can see this, I believe. Hebrew and English, we're good? You never know until you go, yeah? Excellent. So this is actually a phrase that I've been using since the first funeral I did. And I use it also, interestingly, at the end of weddings, because this was a juncture that intrigued me, that happiness breeds sadness, sadness breeds happiness, and both biblical text and rabbinic text thrive with tongue-in-cheek, irony, sarcasm, and self-deprecation. Could you imagine self-deprecating humor out of the Romans? Stop and think it. They're not so funny. They kill their own families to get your attention. And I have my credentials. I taught Latin in a Catholic school. I brought it back to life. One of my colleagues is there, a nursing instructor, and retired now, Miriam Edelman. And my supervisor, Brian Wilson at Sonoma State, knows that I get everywhere from good reviews to cure kids crying because of my sense of humor in class. And then they come and take the class again. So why is that? In Mishlei, and I'm just going to tell you that the word Mishlei means proverbs, right? But mashalu in Akkadian, remember that PhD stuff? So I always look for the origin of words. Mashalu is a mirror. Proverbs are a mirror. Are you with me? Proverbs are a mirror. So in speaking in Mishlei, which is one kind of literature, which is enveloped in a larger type of literature called wisdom literature. Think, for those of you who know, or you'll ask questions, the book of Ecclesiastes, maybe 30 or 40% of the Psalms, the whole book of Mishlei, of Proverbs, is filled with wisdom literature, and the book of Job, which is almost like a Greco-Roman play, except it's a millennium and a half earlier. It's Mesopotamian humor. I did everything I could for God, and what did he give me? You know, it's literally a hyperbolic, exaggerated context, which is only 2 chapters of a huge book where God is taunted by humans, and humans fight back and say, no. And that's the origin of speaking truth to power, which the Hebrew prophets do, and therefore Jesus does. And who's Jesus's most quoted prophet? Oh, the ones who talk back the most. Isaiah. He didn't do one miracle in his life. What did he do? He facetiously said, I'll heal your cold, but you better take care of the poor and the widow and the orphan. And then basically flips off the king, which is why there's a famous phrase that they, the Jews, not only taunt their prophets, but occasionally they kill their prophets, which is also a joke within a joke, because it was the prophets that were driving the ethics, not the kings and not the priests. So when it says, even in laughter, the heart aches, gam b'schok, just even if you don't know Hebrew, just listen, schok. You know, some people have a laugh like that, so it may be onomatopoetic. Yechav lev, there's pain in the heart. And achrita, what's the end of all this? Again, very book of Ecclesiastes, even though it comes from the Mishlei, early. Achrita, what comes of it? Simcha, happiness, to og, becomes a worry, becomes a torment. So it's encouraging you to see the dilemma of being a human, and that the universe has constant cycles of life and death. And then it surprises you, right? Okay, so I assert as a working hypothesis, I'll work as quickly as I can, that the biblical approach toward humor is a byproduct of storytelling and wordplay. If most of the Hebrew Bible was in an oral form for probably 1,000 years before the Davidic and Solomonic era of about 1000 BCE, here we are, ding, 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 right in this period, that's when the Hebrew Bible is edited, but it was in a storytelling form, vignettes, cautionary tales, internal jokes, occasionally slogans that people were chanting. It's very interesting stuff. It's not the stuff of we now read from the Old Testament, and very somber congregant comes up and blah, 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 and now we read from the New Testament, blah, 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 and you think, how distant, but how reverent, right? But that's not the Hebrew Bible, because a style of provoking thought was to play tricks with your audience, auditory tricks, word plays, and it was a method of strengthening critical skills. It's a pedagogic tool, and it's acceptable. Are you with me? It is encouraged in the Hebrew Bible. Apparently, the authors that they chose to copy and then replicate and then freeze into the canon of the Hebrew Bible are constantly sharpening their own rhetorical tools to everybody's delight. And also, I think it's very interesting. This is something I've thought of over the last 40 years. They're also confirming student engagement. So these pedagogic tools are replicable, and they want to make sure their students are listening. And students who don't laugh or miss the laugh are usually not listening. So why would the Hebrews, a fairly isolated people, develop such a huge, sophisticated literary history? Well, it's because, look, they're exposed in the matriarchal, patriarchal period 4,000 years ago. They're exposed again in the Mesopotamian period. And now, toward the end, this is roughly the period from 1400 down to 1200 of Moses. Now, Moses is not a historical figure, but he's like a historical novel. He lives 400 years, but there are piles of Egyptological references in the stories around the Exodus, such as his name Moses in Egyptian becomes Moshed, because Thuth and Sh are cognate sounds, and it means prince. It's a real word. And Ramses was a real location. You see what I mean? So you have these secondary, not primary, empirical proofs. They had real contact one way or the other with ancient Egypt. So there's a double shot of Mesopotamia. Then they have a shot of Egyptian, then Persian. Persian are very funny people. Aramaic becomes a universal language, and therefore with its own word styles and tricks. And then to top it off, they become proto-scientific 300 years before Jesus. And that's why Jews were toying. The authors of the Hebrew Bible at the end of the Bible, the last 500 years, let's say, before it canonizes in 250, right around here, and the Hebrew Bible canonizes, guess what? They have the Greco-Roman influence, which tends to have deprecating humor. The Romans told lots of Jew jokes and other ethnic jokes, and the Greeks are very pompous and very academic, and it remains the academic language. But what's crazy is they are great storytellers. And as you know, they're great playwrights. And when the audience knows what's going to happen before the actor who's doing it, right, they're foreshadows, the audience is going, no, don't do it, don't do it. And there's Oedipus. He does it every time, and they come back to watch it. For 400 years, it was a running hit.
What do you mean by proto-scientific?
I love you. Who said that?
Joy.
Joy. I am joyous that you asked that. I've made another rant or a learned lecture, depending upon how you see it, on the issue of when did science start to emerge in the Hebrew Bible. And it's way before the Greco-Roman or De Rerum Natura of the nature of things by Lucretius, where everyone else begins the scientific method. So in the book of Proverbs, they talk about animal locomotion. They talk about weather in the opening of the book of Ecclesiastes, right? And Hemingway picks that up. The sun also rises, but then it sets and it gets hot and there's convection. They don't say convection. They just describe it. They don't say precipitation. They just talk about the water that is up, like the word heaven in Hebrew. Here's a 4,000 or 5,000 year old joke. Sham, there, mayim, shamayim. It doesn't mean heaven. It means the place of water, because that's where it falls. But then they say, but there's also water that bubbles up. And they start having again, proto, meaning pre or early description of the geography of the world, and that it was a floating disk, not flat, a floating disk that's sort of concave. This is sort of the way they viewed the heaven shape, and that the water was held above, and therefore we see through it, and periodically the gates open or shut, and they do below. And there's also references to medicinal healings and I would say almost shiatsu. You know, if you touch certain places when you pray, if you've ever watched Jewish prayer, it literally is rocking and knocking on the door to see if your heart is still listening. And shu'ila, the raising of the hands, right? Today we had a wonderful physician show up. No physicians were showing up. So what did my patient do? Without words, when the guy left, he went like this. This is a 10,000-year-old gesture, right? The raising of the hands. Okay, thank you for that question. I love being interrupted, by the way, seriously. So the rabbinic period then kicks in, okay? So we've seen amusement, humor, laughter, myths, fables, wisdom literature, and nation-building tales. I'll give you a couple examples from the Bible. In the rabbinic period, now notice this spans Jesus's life and murder by the Romans. Look, 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 look. There he is. So the rabbinic period was already roughly 200 years old in an oral form, and it wouldn't be written down until long after these guys were all dead. But guess what they did? They kept the stories alive by memorization. And the Talmud quotes people from hundreds of years before. Out of respect to them, they get the first shot. And then we, the later generations, get ours. And I just want to give credit to somebody I met, a guy in Virginia. He also loved collections of these plays on words and such. So his name is Maurice Mizrahi. And Mizrahi means from the East. It's a very Sephardic name. So here's some pirate smiles. When we usually talk about the book of Genesis and the first 2 to 5 chapters, what is that story cycle usually referred to as? The stories of, I don't fill in my own blanks.
Creation.
Yep. And who are the key characters when we come to the creation of humans? The crown of creation? Who do we usually call them?
Adam and Eve.
Exactly. Who's more important? Don't you giggle. Tell me who. I'm a bald feminist. Make my day.
You're baiting me.
I have spent a career baiting people. Thank you so much. Yes, and the minute I write Eve and Adam, you go, you're not thinking like a Greek or a Roman. But the Hebrew Bible has a joke, and the joke is that the woman who is the source of curiosity, and the woman who shows creativity, and the woman who talks back to God, while Adam goes, I've got a belly button. Can I name the animals? Right? She's negotiating with the powers of the universe, good, bad, and indifferent. It's a play within a play. And sort of like stories from the Mediterranean, the woman gets blamed for curiosity, and it's the source of punishment. But guess what? For her creativity and being a little quirky and idiosyncratic as a thinker, guess what we got? Knowledge. And the awareness that we have a limited amount of time and you can use it well or poorly. We know that. And by the way, I would call that proto-psychology. It's no big surprise, and this would always, Brian, delight the students who were psych majors. I would say, did they ever tell you what ethnicity or culture all of the founding mothers and fathers were of psychiatry and psychology? A big percentage are Jewish. You know why? Because the rabbis were thinking like this. And they were thinking about educational psychology, that gesture that I said, push your students, smack them with one, not literally, and pull them toward you with the other. So that's the Adam and Eve story. Fill in the blanks or give me a call if you don't agree with me. Here's another classic. You're probably all aware of the cycle of the mother-son thing, right? This is way before the Greeks. And you have Sarah being told she's going to have a child at what point in her life? What would we now call that? What period in her life?
Old age.
Specific to a woman's reproductive cycle.
Past, whatever. whatever it's called.
Menopause?
Yeah.
Yeah, right? So again, here's something, it's just wonderful. You mentioned what's proto-scientific. Did the authors of the Bible know that intercourse leads to pregnancy? Yes or no? Absolutely. I saw enough hair shaking there. Good. Yes, they knew. And therefore, who makes a joke about it? When she finds out the old man's going to get her pregnant. And by the way, this is my ethics and healthcare side, the billions of dollars to help males have erections. And science is just that much interested in women. But male problems, right? So think about the funding cycle in American medicine. But the joke is, Sarah goes to God and says, are you kidding me? The old man's going to be able to do that, and my dried out body is going to do that? And therefore, what does she call her first child? The fruit of her womb. Now,
Laughter.
in English, it's Isaac, right? That sounds like a good biblical name. Isaac.
It means laughter.
Yes. So if you look down in the bottom here, even if you don't know Hebrew, the tsa, which is one letter, the ch is another letter, and k is the third letter. That's the triliteral root that means you're kidding me. Laughter boy, laughing boy, funny man. And she confronts God, and you know, this becomes, by the way, the theological origin to some degree of the notion of virgin birth, because the other big joke, and I could do it another 45 minutes just on this word, is that the matriarchs are different and more powerful than all of the Mesopotamian and Egyptian goddesses. Why? I don't answer my own question. What don't they have that every goddess has in every pantheon other than the monotheistic religion? What do the Hebrew matriarchs, and there are 4 of them, there are only 3 fathers. There's a joke within another joke. You watching me? There's the sacred 7, 4 matriarchs, 3 patriarchs. Who's more powerful? Who's more numerous? The women. So somebody answer that question. What attribute do all of the Hebrew matriarchs lack? And therefore, the Hebrew Bible is with a pirate smile, emphasizing something else. What are they missing? What do they have to pray for? What needs divine intervention?
Having a son.
Having anything. They're infertile. 100% matriarchal infertility. Very interesting, isn't it? And it's the exact opposite. Again, a play within a play based on cultural sharing and knowledge of Mesopotamia, where I showed you those influences. Woohoo! Look at that. So the joke is, their women, I'm paraphrasing, their women are fertility goddesses. They're hot. They, will imitate that with all sorts of sexual rights. The Jews go, no sexual rights, no hotness. We need smart women. I'm nothing without them. And that's what Abraham is to Sarah. She's it. She the business, right? And then, I'm not going to overemphasize this, but I am a bald feminist. Deborah is the smartest Hillary Clinton of the ancient world. And she was appreciated, not rejected. The Hebrews and modern Israel and Pakistan and England and all have had superior female leaders. America is going, well, we have a few TV shows where we've tried it out. You with me? So much for that. Sodom and Gomorrah is a reductio ad absurdum, but it's a challenge to God. Abraham learns that if you want something out of the relationship with God, you got to push back, and you can teach God ethics, and then God can teach the humans ethics. So that's the bargaining back and forth for Sodom and Gomorrah. And it's funny, if I give you can't find 10 people, then I'll kill them. How about 45? That'd be Okay. So it's a brilliant, and it makes for great storytelling. I'm going to skip a couple. This is the one that I'm going to use for transition to rabbinic. I got to watch my time now. So I don't know if you're familiar with this, but in 2 Samuel, chapter 6, 14 to 22, it says that David machriker, and listen to the word, forget the M, karker, which probably means like tapping. Right? He was probably doing this, right? You've seen people do that sort of dancing and clapping, repetitive motions. So David was doing this dance movement with all of his strength and focus. Bechol Oz, by the way, Wizard of Oz. Oz is a play off the word Oz, which means strength. Lifnei Adonai, before God, the David, and David, the same David we just talked about, Chagur Ephod Bad. He was wearing his undies. He was wearing, a see-through sort of sumo wrestler looking thing, right? So then, of course, the King James says he danced naked. No, but he danced inappropriately. He was lifting his legs, he was shaking his booty, whatever it is, right? And it's real, and it's funny, and he's the king of Israel. And is Jesus stylized a little after David? Yeah. Right? The least becomes the greatest. Right? There it is. So what comes of that is the Kabbalists, 1,500, 2,000 years plus later, say, you know what? He really was dancing like an idiot. And sacred silliness and unconventionality rocks. It's the highest form of respect, and shtut is shtick. Everyone's heard and read the word shtick, right? You got like a gimmicky sort of thing. So shtut de kedusha, the sacred shtick, gets your attention of people. And I'm becoming interested in this. There is a new form of bipolarism that's being identified. Bipolarism 2. They're manic, but more manic than depressed, and they can hold a job. So there's no question that David and Saul both are very interesting explorations of mental illness, but they're both functional. So I give these little pieces out. You don't love me, give me a call. You like it, we talk more. Biblical fables. This is the transition. Now, I put this sentence together for you to think about, because most of my career, as you very nicely said, my mother appreciated your saying all my degrees. The punchline is that there are only 200 years other than Moses. So I'll add another 100 years, 200 years. Okay, so let's say 400 years out of 4,000, 1/10 of the Hebrew experience has miracles that are supernatural. All of the Hebrew prophets, the big ones, are literary, and they don't do physical miracles. Who does physical miracles? Elijah and Elisha. It's a very small period of time. It's 2 generations. And by the time the Hebrew Bible is canonized, the first sentences that come out of the Apocrypha are Ein Navi Be'iro. There's no prophet in his or her own town. And the voice of the prophets is no longer heard. So by the time Jesus shows up, the Jews are very skeptical about biblical prophets. Had nothing to do with Jesus. Had to do with that they've been dealing with the Greeks and the Romans and modernity. And it was like, where's God if that's all happening, right? It's sort of pre-Holocausty thinking. So this is the most interesting support text I would use, a core text. So there's a story. It's really a fable. It's in 2 Kings, 2:23. It's 2 sentences. And it's the precursor of Midrash which is the precursor, well, actually, it's just the Hebrew for what becomes parables. And all of you who were raised in the Christian world know that Jesus spoke in parables. Meaning he was not a straight talker, because all the rabbis had jokes, they had stories, they had oh wows, they would cry, they would laugh, and then they would also do this. They would tell a story and they go like that and wait for the students to respond and screw with their minds, if you will. So here's a story, and look what the rabbis did with it. Again, proto-scientific. Elijah went up from there to Bethel. He had just successfully, by the way, purified water. He was a water purifier. Okay. And while he was going up on the way, some small boys came out, right? The little kids came out of the city and jeered him and said, Ale kareach, ale kareach, ale kareach, ale kareach, which means, if you are a miracle work, raise yourself up, baldy. Literally. So here's a little 3,000-year-old joke saying, in his own period, kids would taunt miracle workers and said, okay, do a miracle, right? So raise yourself up. Aleh means go up. And those of you who know aliyah, meaning you're called up to the Torah, or you immigrate to Israel, you make aliyah. So it means go up. And kareach is this. In modern Hebrew, it's karachat, same words. And now get a hold of the story. Elijah turns around, gets pissed off, and he says, I'm going to curse you kids in the name of the Lord. 2 she-bears lumber out of the woods, keywords highlighted, bears and woods, and tore 42 of them apart. And from there, he moved back up to where he hung out, which is Mount Carmel. And from there, he returned to Samaria. Killed 42 children, moved on. So what do the rabbis do with this story? The rabbinic interpretation, which is used in modern Hebrew to this day for when you're skeptical, when somebody is hyperbolic. Like, for example, a lot of the marches against Netanyahu say, Lo dubim velo ya'ar. I got news for you. There are no bears and there's no forest. So this is exactly what the rabbis did. They completely negated, because they knew it was only a method of teaching. The lesson, children, is respect your elders. Interesting? But there's a complete rejection of biblical miracles, especially when they're implausible and cruel. So I'm going to tell you one more quickie in the rabbinic period, and then I'll be quiet and you can ask me to prove other aspects of this. Okay, so I can do like 2 or 3 very quickly. I'll do one, which is excuse making. Weak excuse making in the Hebrew Bible is then used facetiously in rabbinic texts. So I'm paraphrasing. Here's the setup. Moses is upstairs on the mountain getting the Torah. The people get scared and they ask Aaron to make a golden calf. You know that, to worship. Aaron obliges, and angry Moses comes down and confronts Aaron and says, what the hell, what's this? And what does Aaron say? And it's literally like from Seinfeld take line. It ain't me, babe. They gave me the gold. I threw it in the fire and poof, you won't believe this. A calf shows up. What do you think, Moses? Where were you? You were up there. I was down here. And of course, the punchline is he was being irresponsible. That's sort of like a repetition of an ethical fable, which is Hashomer Achi Anochi. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, you idiot, you are. That is the earliest ethical rule in the Hebrew Bible. You know, am I responsible for the other guy, what he thinks and what I say? And he goes, Hashomer Achi Anochi? And the line stands out there, and I can tell you, I don't have to be told, I don't have to find it. For 2,000 years, the rabbis would do that and then just go like this. And I've done it at Sonoma and Dominican. Hundreds of students heard this. And I said, so what's the answer to that rhetorical question? And it puzzles them because I didn't answer it, I asked it. So one rabbinic, and then I be quiet for a moment. So rabbinic authority has swag. These guys got class, right? I gave you the year. They use adages, mnemonic devices, and persuasive arguments. So there are about 1,960 rabbis, 960, mentioned in the Talmud. One of them is Rabbi Bar Nachmani, right? We have when he died. These are real characters. He lived in Babylonia, foreign influence, never wanted to live or leave for Jerusalem schools. He was committed to the diaspora. Oh, did I mention for 22 years, he was head of a rabbinic academy. And they're actually finding these academies as the Tigris and Euphrates, because of climate change, are revealing. They're finding these huge, and here's a picture which sort of backs up how crowded the schools were. Okay, so what can you say about him? He says rhetorically, he was good at marketing. In the Talmud, it says he attracted 12,000 students twice a year for a 1-month-long seminar. How's that for modernity? And how did he keep them listening, right? What was the key to his advertising? By the way, look at the number of Jews in advertisement. That's a whole, right? This group has been thinking about this stuff for a long time. He was a social and ethical critic of anti-fraud behavior in Pumbedita, meaning in his hometown, right? He was talking about hometown corruption, which is right near Fallujah. This is real places. The residents hated him. The students loved him. The leaders hated him. The students loved him because he was a firebrand. So what did the rabbis say? They say he's a firebrand. And then all of a sudden it says, before he began his drash, remember we used the word midrash? Before he would tell a parable, to the scholars, Rabbah used to say something funny. And the scholars were cheered, meaning they were delighted. After that, he sat and began to lecture. He would tell a joke, go like this, they would applaud, and now he had their attention. And he would test them. And Brian, I did this, so you can accuse me of it. I didn't realize how old it was. He would test his students by their attention and acuity, this is me writing, by referencing improper cases and facts. So I would say something like, last week we studied the 11 commandments. And I would freeze and then wait for some reaction. I would say, Judaism is only a patriarchal society. It's only interested in male figures, as we learned last week. And I've just proven to you the centrality of female, right? So I would wait for that. So there is a substantiation of being a contrarian. He would delight them, and then he would occasionally, find a student who he could push back on. And there are examples of jugglers and joke tellers, and it's all permitted by the most important. It would be like if Ruth Bader Ginsburg had retired and gone into comedy, like she probably should have. But she didn't retire, and she was a great lady, but she didn't know she should have retired. So these rabbis knew when to be funny, when to enter, and when to exit. So that is my presentation. Thank you very much. You may turn off the recording. We can have a little fun.